anytime I hear that music, I feel like I just want to start dancing. And actually, with the speaker yesterday, it was amazing too. The music that she had playing, and it was the spaceship, and I'm like, can we just get up and dance first? This would be a lot more exciting. Because I'm employee engagement, I like to engage people when I'm talking. Okay, so I might be telling you stories, but I'm not talking at you. I want to be talking with you a lot. So I want to need you to play with me a little bit. Okay, so here's the first thing. How many people here ever worked at an organization and they hated it? Raise your hand. Okay? Now, how many people here actually loved the place that they worked so much that they never wanted to leave? Maybe you're in a place like that right now. Okay? So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that this morning. We're here now, though, because we are wanting to be more high-performing organizations. And someone mentioned that yesterday. And not a lot of people talk in those terms. High-performing really does mean, and let's just keep it simple, that if we're a publicly traded company, our shareholders are happy with what it is we're delivering as far as value. Our employees are happy that they are getting what it is they're expecting when they took the position they took. Our customers are saying, wow, I love the product and services that this organization provides. I love the service that they deliver to me. And for that reason, this is why you are becoming high-performing. But here's the thing. High-performing organizations don't exist without people. So whatever we think about, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all these things we hear, and it's like, oh, we're a little afraid about that. In the end, though, machines can never replace what people do for people. So that's just something to keep in mind. People often ask me why it is I do what I do. How are you an employee loyalty advocate? That'll make some sense when I tell you kind of where I was at and where I'm coming from. So it actually started for me when I was a child. I actually am a product of an interracial and interfaith marriage. My mom is white, my dad's black. My mom is Jewish, and my father is a non-practicing Christian. Yeah, it was very interesting, very interesting. And in fact, I know even people in HR that might be in here that might make the hair stand out, oh, I don't think we want to talk about race and religion here. But it's an important context to know kind of why I'm even here today. So the thing is, here's what you want to think about. Have you ever seen Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? If people think, oh, that was kind of funny, but it wasn't very funny actually. I wasn't able to go to bar mitzvahs, to weddings, to anything that was really in the public. I was voiceless. I just wasn't allowed to be seen. I was literally the black sheep of the family. And I felt like I wasn't important. I felt like I was not valued and really like an outsider or an outcast inside of my own home. And it's really not, a great place to be. And in 1971, actually, it was actually illegal, almost illegal for my parents to even be married. So it was a big deal. So I'm going to fast forward 15 or so years, and I ended up going to law school. And don't hold that against me. I know, it's oh gosh. With my past and this new kind of direction, it's really where my desire to advocate for other people and be the voice for the voiceless really took root. And that's why it's such a strong passion for me now. But when I went to law school, it was great, but I didn't want to be pushing papers and being in law libraries every time. And so I decided to kind of take a different journey. And so then what I did is I fast forward that some years, and I decided to really focus my efforts on being more of an external customer-facing advocate. And so I worked for organizations where I was the voice for the external customer, and I'd bring that back to the leadership, and I would be their voice at the table, which oftentimes both the customer and the employee do not have a voice at the table. And so I would be that voice, and I'd have to kind of take on that fight, which was totally fine because I was willing to do the fight for them. So about 5 years ago, I worked for a company, and it was going through a big merger. And it was a merger of 5 companies that were coming together. And the culture was very obviously going down here. Anybody work in a merged environment now or before, and the culture and the fear that existed there? And so inside that fear, I took notice, but no one else did. No one else took notice of what was happening to the people inside of all the change. They were excited about the growth. They were excited about the new product rollouts, but they were not thinking about what was happening to the people inside of there. And so I had gone to the head of HR, and I said, you know what, we have got to do something about employee engagement, something about our culture. It's going downhill fast. And she said, you're right. You go do that. I'm like, I'm in customer experience. I'm leading customer experience. That's the external customer. But it made sense to me because she said, you're the culture bearer. You've been the one who's always uplifting people. People come to you and ask, what's going on with other leaders, and you give them advice. So it makes sense that you do it. So I did do it. And I started the Employee Engagement Council. And pretty quickly, we noticed some really powerful things. Here's the thing. People started to gather a greater understanding of who each other was. And when they did that, the trust increased. Right? And so when they did that through all the different activities we put together, we just started to see the culture improve. But the merger didn't go so well. So it was about all the companies. They basically hired way too many folks that were high paid from like Oracle, and they just took on too much too fast, and they let a lot of people go. I was one of the people that they let go. I knew it was going to go wrong when the head of sales and the CEO was let go off this private equity thing that happened. I thought, oh yeah, it's my turn. It's going to happen. But that's all right. It was an ouchie at the time because I was a breadwinner of the family of 6. I have 4 children, and yet craziness. Like, why did I do that? But anyway, but during that time, though, like right when it happened, again, it was hurting. But then it really became clear to me, that's what I was supposed to be doing. I was supposed to be that voice back to organizational leaders about what it is their people need through the change, what it is that they just need from the organization to make them happier, to keep them more loyal, and to keep them more engaged. So that's really where that journey took hold for me. And actually, when you think about it, that little girl who didn't have a voice, the one who felt like an outcast, the one who felt unimportant, now has the ability and gets the privilege to take on that voice for other people. So it's pretty cool. I do consider it a privilege. Okay, so when we think about employees, when they think of high performing, they think that if their needs are met first, then they can meet or exceed your customers' expectations. It's worth saying that again. If we think about high-performing organizations, the definition changes a little bit. They think that you meet their needs first, and then they take care of all the other things. So based upon that kind of renewed definition, how many people think they work for a high-performing organization? Okay, probably even more than most rooms, but not a lot of hands going up. And that's all right, right? Because this is a consistent process, a process that we are going to always be moving towards improving in our organizations. And we're here, you are here, kudos to you, because you're trying to become more high-performing, at least in that area of people and engagement, which, by the way, drives the bus forward anyway. So here's a really scary stat. 20 to 50% of employees are leaving organizations. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I mean, do you think in a high-performing organization, turnover is going to be that high? Probably not. And there is going to be turnover, but not this high. Here's the reason why there's going to be some turnover. In a high-performing organization, if you listen to the original definition, and you're moving, and you're innovating, and you're changing, and you're exceeding all your customers' expectations, and your shareholders are happy, you're probably, again, you're innovating. So a lot of people inside that organization aren't happy about change. Anybody here either change-averse or know somebody change-averse? Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I've struggled with some of that sometimes. So when you have people like that are struggling with change a lot and are going to be fighting up against this change that's happening and any of the great innovations that are happening, then you're going to see that kind of turnover. Otherwise, you're not going to see that. Okay, so in my book, The 7 Intuitive Laws of Employee Loyalty, what I've done is I've taken the experiences of reading thousands of employee engagement comments, employee engagement survey comments, lots, like hundreds and hundreds of employee focus groups. And to be honest, a lot of my own experience being that kind of sounding board for employees from all across the organizations I worked, even when they weren't on my team directly. So here we go. All right, so purposely I've done this. This is law number 1 in my book, and it is because it is the number 1 reason why people are staying. Okay? So you hear a lot of stats about the boss. So based upon what I said earlier when I was asking you, if you ever left a position because you absolutely hated it, raise your hand for me if it was because of your supervisor or your manager. Okay. So that's about right. Sometimes it's 50 to 60%, sometimes it's 70%, it depends on the room. That makes a lot of sense because managers can make or break the employee experience. There's so much of what I talk about that really drives back to them. Now, here's the thing. I remember working for someone, actually in that merged environment, where the CEO, who happened to be my boss, he was promoted to that, and I don't really quite know how. He would go around he was intelligent, but he would go around and he would listen to what people were saying, and he would have conversations with people in the office. And then he would just take all that information and he would take it back to the private equity people, and he would take it back to his board members, and he would act like it was his own idea, and he would act like it was his own information, and he never gave credit where credit was due. It really just makes my skin crawl thinking about the kind of person that doesn't give credit to his team. But I have to tell you, I teach on this stuff and I'm not perfect. Okay, so I remember a time where I went into one of my team members' offices and I was on my way to a meeting and I saw her face, but I dropped something on her desk like, here you go, like take this, and I just left my meeting. But while I was in that meeting, I was thinking to myself, dang, like something was not right with what I just did. And when I came back from the meeting, I went to her and I said, I am so sorry. I should have known that you were just over-leveraged. And so now let's sit down and let's reevaluate what your plate looks like, if you can even handle this project I'm giving you. And so in this case, I wish I was more emotionally intelligent ahead of time, or I would have just not had to go back to apologize. I did show some emotional intelligence by going back to her after the fact and sensing that it wasn't right and admitting my mistakes. But in the end, I wish I would have done it kind of ahead of time. So when we think about workplace discontent, it really isn't all these things. This stat really doesn't change. The boss really does drive a lot of this. So I want everybody now to shout out for me the one or two words that describes your best boss ever. So just shout out some words. Keep going. I know there's more. Love it. I haven't heard anybody that says they paid me really well. They gave me lots of gift cards. They let me have free travel. I didn't hear that. Here's the thing. 90% of employee experience is driven by emotions. And leaders get to choose which emotions they unleash from within the people they lead. And right now, what you just said, all those words you said, were things they made you feel in the end. You trusted them because they made you feel a certain way. You felt like they had your back because they made you feel that way. There may have been some proof behind that, but in the end, it was the feelings that they elicited within you that made you remember them forever, and you're able to describe them that way. So I had a few years ago, I worked for an organization, and I was in an interview with one of my team members and a prospective candidate. And something that my team member said made the prospective candidate say, what is it that makes your team the team I should go to work for? Why shouldn't I go up the street and work for XYZ company? And I sat there like, uh-oh. Like he asked the team member that, so I couldn't answer. So I had to just kind of sit there, and I was like, ooh, I wonder what he's going to say. And he sat and kind of pondered, and he looked up and he said, this lady right here. And I was like looking behind me like, what lady? What are you talking about? And he said, no, you. Here's why. Before you came aboard, we would see a manager like twice a year. No one came to ask us what it was they could do to overcome obstacles for us, what could we make our jobs better. No one just seemed to care. No one checked in on us. We felt like a number. When you came aboard, you started to set up one-on-one meetings with me. You would drop in spontaneously and see how things are going. Whenever there was an issue, you jumped right on it. You followed up with email. You really were in our corner. It made all the difference. Now, I have to tell you, based upon all the work that I've done, I felt really good in that moment. I felt like I was kind of validated for all the work I had done up to that point. But at the same time, the thing that stuck out to me is, again, the things he referred to didn't cost me a thing. I didn't have to spend money to deliver on that at all. So again, it just tells us that the emotions that how much control and positive power we elicit and we actually have as leaders is super duper impactful. So it's something to remember. Law number 2, appreciation. Woohoo, Tiny Pulse. Right? I mean, that's the reason why I'm aligned with Tiny Pulse, because I know they believe so much in this, that they offer an amazing solution that fulfills this. How many people love to be recognized and appreciated for the work that you do? Oh, more hands than usual. Some people are like, Okay, I love it too. And people receive a dopamine boost in their brain when they give and receive recognition. So it really says we should be doing more of it. And this also says that we should be doing more of it. 79% of employees cite a lack of appreciation for a reason why they're leaving their position. That's big. That says we need to be doing a lot more of it. We need to be putting processes in place, like having a system like TinyPulse, or any other system for that matter, really, that makes sure that we are making it consistent. Gallup has a stat out there, and I saw someone put it up yesterday, that says that employees who have not been recognized in the last 7 days feel like they've never even been recognized. So how many people are managers or supervisors, if any people out here? Okay, so there are quite a few, right? So you might think, oh, I'm doing a good job of recognizing. If you recognize them last month in an employee meeting, just so you know, it's not really registering all that much. They're not remembering that as much. So here's my solution, because there's just no way. I've been a manager of teams for many years. There's no way if I've got like 10 direct reports, I can remember that, oh, it's been 7 days for this person, right? That would be hard to really do. But what I think we should do is crowdsource recognition. We should set up multiple ways to do that. And TinyPulse helps us with that because we've got the executive team who can go in. We've got their coworkers who can go in. We've got their team, their managers that can do that. And the only other thing that's really missing from that system is customers, allowing customers to be able to give it to you. So every time they're getting these little dopamine boosts, there's a recognition thing that's coming in, and they're like, okay, and you're filling them up. Now, having said that, there's nothing more important than the recognition you as their frontline manager can give them. So it feels good to have everybody else do it, but the biggest boost they get is when it comes from that frontline supervisor. It feels just the best because they know that you are seeing the work that they're doing and that you're valuing that. Some of the other ways that we can actually look at recognition are, so we have that type of program, but you can also keep it really simple. At that organization that was going through that merger, we had actually taken their organizational values, and we put together these little thumbs up cards based upon the values that they had. I mean, it might have cost, I don't even know, like for the entire office, $100 to print, okay? And people would write on those, and you know, great, I saw you doing this particular thing, and it was based upon this particular value, and it was amazing, and you would just sign it. And then you would give it to them, just hand it to them. And you would be amazed to see how many of those people would put those inside their cubicles to make sure that they could see what was going on. They could see, wow, I am like kind of amazing. People like me here. So it was a really good and effective way to do it. It doesn't have to be technology. We can use something like TinyPulse, but you have to make sure that there's multiple ways. Some people, technology is great, but some people, when you hand deliver it to them, then it's like even more powerful. There really is nothing more powerful than the written word too. Okay, law number 3, yay, TinyPulse again. I mean, really, that's inside their platform, they have so many ways you can listen. You know, you think about my story, the importance of feeling like your voice is important, that you have power in the words that you say, that you are actually valued and important in your organization. And that's what this law does for people, making sure that they feel heard. So when we think about, this is kind of an interesting parallel. Think about that baby that's in a crib, okay? I think about this because I have 4 children, and so I think, well, the baby that's in the crib, they're cooing, and they're making all these noises, and mom, dad come and run. Ooh, and the baby's like, ooh, they heard me, they heard me. And they do that, you know, multiple times, and mom and dad come. But then all of a sudden, mom and dad don't come, and the baby starts to, right? They start to wail or start to scream. And then sometimes mom and dad don't come. And then in the parent world, that's a good thing if they stop crying, right? They're like, ooh, they went back to sleep. In the employee world, not so good. That's what you call apathy. So if they're telling us stuff and telling us stuff and telling us stuff and we're responding or we're not responding, and they just keep telling us and they stop telling us, okay? Not a good thing. We want to make sure that we are listening and that we are then acting on it. And I know to a large extent, I'm preaching to the choir because I know that you are here because you are either using TinyPulse or really know that you need to have some system where you're listening. But listening's key. So ways to listen. It would be obviously the surveys, employee focus groups, interviews, stay interviews. Anybody here use stay interviews? A few. Yeah, this is key. Don't just do like the exit interview when they're probably like pissed at you and probably don't really want to talk to you or are really excited to get out the door. Do it when they're there and they're fairly happy. And listen, this doesn't just have to be an HR function. This can be a manager function. If you have built the trust up front with them, you can have a conversation with them just straight up like, what is it that makes you press that alarm button in the morning and press snooze because you just do not want to get out of bed? What is it that makes you want to jump out of bed in the morning to get to us as quickly as you can because you love working for our team? You can ask those type of questions as the manager. It doesn't have to be just an HR thing. You can go even deeper with that too if you've again taken that time to do the building of trust with those people. The other thing would be making sure that you also do your one-on-ones with them and you have team meetings so you can be constantly listening to them. If you have consistent one-on-ones, and if you are someone who then, if you're not a leader, but you're one who influences the leaders in your organization to do these things, tell them the most important thing you can do is have the one-on-one time with them. That means that they are important enough to have a slice of your time, even if it's 15 minutes every week. All right, so this is a key thing that you can do for them to feel like they're heard, and it doesn't have to be always in a very formal way. Law number 4, growing and promoting their talents. Anybody here work in an organization, they just get this right. They do this right. They grow and they promote your talents really well. Not a lot of arms. I notice this actually happens a lot. This is the one where people don't feel the most negatively about. So I look at employee surveys, I look at the results. In most cases, the people do not feel like that there's a path forward in the organization. They don't necessarily feel like it's fertile ground for them. They don't see how they're going to be able to grow. It's critical. And it's even more critical when you think about 26% of employees feel there is adequate opportunities in their organizations for professional growth. And when you think about managers, it goes up a little bit, but 26%, that means the other 74% are like looking somewhere else for the more fertile ground. And if you're not creating that fertile ground, they're going to go somewhere else. So why not try to do all the things you can do to create an environment that leverages the strengths of your people, that grows and promotes them, and don't be threatened by that. So some ways that you can actually do that. One of them is through mentorship. Anybody have a mentorship program in their organization? Good. I love to see that because it's through the mentors, and it doesn't have to be they don't have to commit a lot of time to this, but for them to have consistent access to someone who are some steps ahead of them or maybe where they want to be in the organization, it becomes really helpful for them to have that mentor, and they do help you grow and learn a lot. Some of the other things that you can do to make the people that are, for example, the high potentials in your organization, why not bring them around a table, doing some succession planning or doing some ideation around how it is that we as an organization can be better about promoting and growing the talents, finding and uncovering the talents of our people. Why not do that cross-functionally? I always find that when people are doing, organization leaders are doing succession planning, they tend to just keep it in a small group. It might just be the executive leadership team. It might be just directors. I say open that up. Just bust it open and include those employees who you know have the drive to move forward. I had a friend of mine actually at that position, the job that had the big merger, and she was there for 22 years, but you know what? She had like 6 jobs inside that organization. So another way you can do this, and Zappos does this very well, is they allow for talent mobility within the organization. They allow them to kind of investigate. Someone in customer care can go to finance. Someone in finance can go over to here back to customer care, to marketing. So it just allows them to have more opportunity to uncover what's great inside your organization and how they can use their strengths for the benefit of your organization and the team, and you don't have to lose them. This is critical, right? It just takes too much money to train up all the things that we do for them, and in the end, it goes right out the door unless we do that really tough work. So remember, the ground can be as fertile as you want to make it. You just have to be more intentional about making sure that ground is fertile and that they want to stay there. Law number 5, deep connections. So what happens often is that the executive leaders become disconnected from what it is that their front line is doing. Coworkers become siloized and end up not knowing and understanding what's happening between each other. People don't even know what the mission and vision are about. Some people you can't even recount anybody here know what your company's mission is? What about your company's vision statement? Okay, probably more than most rooms and still not a lot. So they don't know, and they lose that sight to what it is, the connection between the vision and the mission and what they're doing every day is. It's all disconnected. And so the connections, it's incumbent upon the organization and the leaders within it, because an organization, let's just be clear, is just a legal entity. It's the people that are within it. It's up to the executive leaders and the rest of the leaders to make sure that the connections take place. Here's an example. So if you have a place that has cubicles, and the cubicles are like this, and the people's heads are below it, there's a lot less likely that people are going to be communicating with each other because they can't see one another. So why not have a little bit more openness around that? Why not do action learning teams where people are coming together cross-functionally, and I want to highlight cross-function, not just within your team, but all throughout. When I see this happen inside of organizations, actually Margot talked about this the other day. They do so well with the innovation because they're cross-functionally aligning things and they're having people do things across the table from each other. That's where the connection comes in. So when I worked at a couple of positions ago, probably about 5 years ago, I worked for an organization that had a human services department, so it was a county government. And I was doing a focus group, and one of the people recounted for me that she was trying to actually connect more with her team members, but she couldn't, because every time she'd go over, so they were in the same huge department, but she'd go over and try to talk to someone else in another unit, and that team member's manager would look at her like an evil eye, like, what are you doing over here? And the other person said the same thing. I went over there too, and I was trying to just go over and see how it was going and establish a connection and create the rapport, and I couldn't because this manager just keeps doing that. So guess what? We stopped going over there. So now we don't actually talk to our coworkers in the same department but in a separate unit. And you could see like the pain there and the confusion there. Okay, managers, we have to be really open and knowing that if we don't create the connections, I know that TINYpulse has a stat on this, Gallup has a stat on this, that people stay primarily because of people they work with. So if you are making it so hard for them to create the connections between their coworkers, you are pretty much inviting them to exit your organization. So we want to make sure that we're providing those really open environments where people are able to really collaborate. Only 24% of employees feel strongly connected to their coworkers. That's a stat from TINYpulse. That's a scary one, because if I just said that the majority of people are staying because of the people they work with, anybody here love who they work with? I stay where I'm at because of who I work. Yep, look, TINYpulse, there you go. It's an informal survey. Everybody's got that, right? So because of that, this number is scary because that organizations are failing. So how do we do that? We just have to make sure that we focus more on creating more environments. I hear certain people were talking about, oh, we do barbecues and we do this and that. When you're dealing, for example, with remote employees, how the heck do you keep them connected, right? Someone was saying, well, why can't you have like a 5 o'clock Friday happy hour and that person that's in another country or in another state joins? They all join via video and hey, everybody's like got their beer in hand, right? Find a way to promote that kind of connectedness inside your organization. Law number 6. This is a little bit nuanced between the connections and the teamwork. It is through the teamwork that the connection takes place, but it's inside of teams, as Margot talked about, that true innovation takes place. I mean, just think about it. I always like to think of myself as brilliant, like I can come up with this all by myself, but boy, around a table of 5 or 6 people, we are so dangerous, it's not even funny. Because you've got that analytical person, right? You got the creative person, you got the visual person, you got the person who has more experience, less experience. It's just a different lens. And because of that, you're able to produce more. So it's through the team. So here's one way we can promote teams. Anybody here have team recognition processes inside their organization? Literally, for teams themselves. Okay. So we've got probably a little bit more hands again, but not a lot. So instead of it just being individually focused, where I'm recognizing you for a particular performance, if a team has worked cross-functionally to solve a business need, why can't we do something where we recognize them? I worked for a county, and they did this very well. They would have a team work together, and they would bring the team in front of the commissioners and be recorded in like audio and video, and they felt so special. And they came together as a team, and it would be just people you would never think that would work well together, but boy, did they produce great things, because innovation happens through teams. Okay, pay. Law number 7, last law. I placed this one here purposely, just like I placed the manager one first. Pay is important. It is not the only thing. We can make pay less of a thing. So, anybody here ever leave a job for more money? I'm putting my arm up because I did this. You know, it's interesting. I would have never left that job if that manager would have just seen my strengths, taken the strengths, not been pretty much conflicted by them or threatened by them, and said, we are going to use those strengths for the benefit of our organization. We are going to make sure that we use her to the nth degree, right, before she ends up leaving the organization. Also, in the end, it wasn't about money. And this was a nonprofit. It was a mission-driven place. So my heart was tied to the mission, and they did a great job of that. But making sure that the person makes that you feel like it's a place that's fertile, and they're going to help you leverage your strengths. So I put this here. It's interesting. When you think about recognition, when you think about the things I talk about around the manager, If the person does not feel appreciated or valued, money won't matter. Really. If they feel like it's not fruitful, money is not going to matter. You have to do all these other things, and then pay will be less of an issue. Now, when you don't do those things, pay is starts to go way up here, like, hey, I am not appreciated, and they are not paying me nearly enough to deal with this, right? That's kind of what happens. But boy, if we feel like we've been valued and our voice is powerful, and we are stretching all the time, money's, just you have to eat. It needs to be equitable, right? But aside from that, it's less of an issue. Just 37% of engaged employees would consider leaving for a 20% raise or less, based upon or compared to 54% of actively disengaged. That's kind of scary. But it says to me, wow, what an opportunity. If we focus on engaging our people, and we know what that can be by listening to the stuff we get from TINYpulse, by listening to what we get from our one-on-ones, by listening to our employees inside of their focus groups, by listening to what we hear from them in our stay interviews, right? Because we're going to really put all these processes in place to be naturally listening and create a culture of listening in our organizations. Then we're going to engage our people. And then by doing that's a big difference. And if they're actively disengaged. Now, we know, again, people are going to leave for money. But let's try to reduce the reason for that by doing all the other things that we talked about. Okay, so not many people fell asleep. I may have seen a couple tired eyes, but everybody was listening. The key here with all of this is that employee experience really is driven by emotions. You said it yourselves when I asked you about your best manager ever, the best organization ever. They make you feel a certain way. And that's why you continue to work with them and you go over and above. Someone talked about yesterday discretionary effort. Kevin McMullen yesterday, if you were in that breakout session, he did a great job, by the way, and he talked about curating or creating experiences along the way so that it might be proceduralized in the back end where okay, at this milestone we're going to do this, at this milestone we're going to do this, but for the person who's receiving that consistent process you've put in place, it feels good. It makes them feel important. So in the work that I do in the employee engagement space with focus groups and leadership development, it points back to this. Employees are people. They have needs. We can't just kind of cast them aside because they are no longer meeting our needs. We need to find a way to help them flourish. To say, I'm going to, hear about performance improvement plans. In the end, we want to move them to their higher good. Sometimes their higher good is not in our organization. I get that. But a lot of times it is. I think we just take it for granted and say, no longer there. They don't want to move along with the change. I think there's a potential way that we can do that. So I just invite you to know that you have and you yield, whether you're a manager or not, very much a huge amount of positive power over the people that are looking to you for leadership. Thank you.
Great. All right, so if you use Slido, sli.do, we've got some questions coming in, and we've got some time. Good. The top of the list, what questions do you suggest asking during stay interviews that you refer to?
Yes. Well, one of them, that idea of being fluid with the conversation, I'd love to know what is it that makes you get out of bed? What do you, when you press that snooze button, because you really don't want to come in, what is it, what's driving that? It's a funny way to ask it, but you're basically saying, what is it you don't like about coming to work? And what makes you just you're getting dressed and you're humming a tune in the morning? What is it that makes you want to run in and see us and just get to work? Those are two things that really are open-ended, but they start to talk about exactly what it is that's driving them to stay with you. So that would be the first thing. There's lots of others that we can talk about offline, but that would be that first thing that's open-ended that should really drive some great discussion.
Great. Do you have any ideas / training for stagnant, tired managers? Do you have any ideas training for stagnant, tired managers who are not quote-unquote people managers and are resistant to change or don't see the importance of their role?
Wow. I mean, this sounds like, based upon that question, this sounds like one of the folks that might either need to leave the position or leave the organization, because if they're tired and they're stagnant and they're tired and they don't like change and all the things that you mentioned, it's going to be hard to coach that. You kind of have to want to be there first, and then you can be coachable and trainable. What I found in some of the executive coaching I do is that it's so hard if people are kicking and screaming into the situation. But if they have an awareness that they need a little bit of help, a little bit of motivation, they're going to be a lot more receptive to what it is I have to tell them. So, I mean, I think the key is to evaluate whether that person is in the right position on the bus to begin with. You don't want to have to be pushing and not, kicking these people into a different place.
Great. And what are some good best practices to keep employees connected, especially remote workers? What have you seen that works really well?
For remote workers, for sure, there's nothing more powerful than having that sensory experience that you see the person in person. So there's a couple things. One, I would say, make sure that you're consistently seeing them. So even though they're remote, even if they're in another country, once a year see them. If they're in another state, try to go once a quarter. Hopefully you have a group of people there where you can see them. Having that sensory experience is pretty powerful. Secondly, video. That's kind of the next best thing. Using video, being consistent, just like you would with the one-on-ones like you heard in my story earlier. Make sure that you're consistent with having those video meetings. They are super important to them. When you cancel, here's what it says. Oh, that other thing is more important to me. I'm not saying you can't cancel. This happens in life. This is how workplace happens. But minimize it and go back to them and let them know why you had to cancel and reschedule right away, because they need to know that they're important to you, and that's how you show them. So video would be a big one, and just making sure that you do actually get to see them. Don't discount you actually physically seeing them, giving them a hug. That sensory experience is powerful.
Absolutely. And last question, we've heard many times that engaging employees in change doesn't happen overnight. How do I advocate for long-term thinking? My leadership wants instant results.
Yeah, I work a lot with this. So when I'm working with organizations, for example, they come out of, let's say, an annual survey cycle, and they get all this information, and you go through a cycle of listening with them, with employee focus groups, and you action plan, and they're expecting to get kind of immediate results. And I usually just consult with them that this is not a one-hit wonder. When you are going down the road to commit to this, you're committing for the long term. So, I mean, the key is just letting them know that. I think that if you can find case studies or other people with scenarios that you can share with them, how well it happened, but how the trend kind of went up slowly, that's key. With this particular one, the first cycle, they saw just like a little bit, not much. And then that second full cycle of listening that we did and the action planning and the focus groups, boom. They went up like a 40% when they were looking at their best places to work rating. They went up like 45 or 50 slots, which was a huge jump just after that second year. So making sure that you're communicating back to the frontline employees and the executive leaders, the little wins, those little wins that we talk, like you have on that win board, make sure that you're doing that consistently. And again, there you go, Tiny Pulse having the ability to do that and provide that for you. But any other ways that you can do it, in any source that you can, communicating is key during the process, for sure.
Wow. Great. Well, give a big round of applause for Heather Younger. Thank you so much.